Thanks for joining, Professor Ganguly. What do you think about this Indo-US ties at the moment, and how the ties have changed in past 9 years, uh, if you compare from earlier years in different administrations or governments in India?
The real transformation in Indo US relations came about actually under George W. Bush in 2008, following the signing of the US India Civilian Nuclear Accord. I think that was really a turning point, a pivotal moment in the relationship because it finally led to the lifting of a whole series of American sponsored and supported sanctions on India because of its nuclear tests in 1998. And subsequently, there has been sort of fitful movement in the relationship, but it certainly developed further and deepened under the second Obama administration. During the first Obama administration, the administration's priorities lay elsewhere, mostly with China and domestic politics, particularly given that Obama had inherited an economy practically on the verge of collapse. And consequently, foreign policy was not necessarily a priority to the extent that it was largely China. But with the second Obama administration, after Obama found himself embarrassed in China by his hosts, I think a fundamental shift took place, and increasingly the administration came to see China as a strategic competitor in Asia and saw India as a potential strategic bulwark against China. And then, following the Obama administration, the Trump administration, because it had several people on the National Security Council who were hawkish on China and focused on the Indo-Pacific, they courted India. And at the same time, they found a somewhat willing partner in India, in Modi, because Modi, even though you will recall that at one time he had been denied a visa to India because of the tragedy that had taken place in Gujarat, Modi, curiously enough, did not have the ideological baggage of the past and consequently was able and willing to work with the United States. And then, of course, the turning point came with the first the incidents in the Doklam Plateau in Sikkim in 2017, and then subsequently in Ladakh, where there was a major skirmish after decades in Sino-Indian relations, and the hope that Manmohan Singh, his predecessor, and Modi had that growing economic interdependence would enable India to set aside the security issue, that hope, that fond hope, was completely dashed in Ladakh. Particularly with the clashes in Ladakh. And all this talk about the spirit of Wuhan, of entertaining Modi, entertaining Xi Jinping in Chennai, all this quickly, the good feeling that New Delhi had completely evaporated. And particularly during the the Ladakh crisis, the United States provided real-time intelligence to India on Chinese troop movements and military deployments, which certainly helped strengthen the relationship. So all of these things have bolstered the relationship. The only fly in the ointment has been India's significant military dependence on Russia, particularly for the purchase of the S-400 missile system. And That has irked a number of people in the American Congress, but Biden has tried to set that aside in an effort to continue to court India. Otherwise, Modi would not be granted this state visit.
This is quite a historic moment for any country, and now Prime Minister Modi is on a state visit. Obviously, at this time when there are elections next year in
Yeah.
America, a very important election. So, what do you see this moment as Biden administration's trying to keep India in its camp, come what may? I mean, it's purely because they want to have a strategic bulwark, as you said, against China.
The two issues that will probably come up in the discussions, one is India's continued reliance on Russian military weaponry and India's unwillingness to publicly criticize the invasion and occupation of portions of Ukraine. That's one. The other, which I suspect that the administration will not put in a joint communique or will not make a public statement about, is quite frankly India's growing democratic deficit and India's maltreatment of minorities, particularly since 2019. And the administration, I doubt, will raise this in any public forum because they know the acute sensitivities of the Modi government about this matter. Russia, you can raise in a public forum, but raising the issue of India's democratic deficit is a highly sensitive matter. And chances are that if Biden or Blinken wants to raise this, it'll be done quietly and under the radar.
There have been these reports from USCIRF, International Religious Freedom Commission, and also from the State Department, which has detailed lists of these atrocities and other democratic institutions being weakened. How is Biden administration dealing with all that?
The democratic deficits and the shortcomings and the problems that India faces are very real. Has that ever stopped the United States from dealing with squalid Latin American dictatorships or having a working relationship with one of the worst violators of human rights, Saudi Arabia? So it's not as if the US has the most flawless record, even after the Cold War, when it comes to dealing with regimes with less than stellar human rights records.
This sales of arms defense production partnership, how do you see that relationship really picking up now under Modi government?
Much depends on how the Modi government actually implements this policy. Because it's wonderful to sign an agreement, but the implementation in India often leaves a great deal to be desired. And this is not just characteristic of the Modi government. This is a degree of what I refer to as institutional slackness, that the institutions exist. They work on certain days of the week. On other days of the week, they're dysfunctional. And then there is this labyrinth in Indian bureaucracy, which for decades has been enmeshed first with the Soviets and now with the Russians. They will constitute a lobby and say, nay, the Americans are not reliable. Yes, they're selling us this engine, but we should scrutinize this deal carefully because many of them, from the Cold War onwards, had become attached and dependent on first the Soviets and the Russians. And this is a brave new world for them. And so there will be a degree of institutional inertia. So we'll have to wait and see how this, for example, if it was with the private sector, suppose, for example, Tata makes certain airframes for American aircraft. There, it's much more straightforward. Once the requisite authorizations are in place, the private sector can run with it, particularly a major industrial conglomerate like Tata. But if it's the government of India, don't expect a miraculous transformation next year.